Alright, we're going to move our way into chapter 20, which is onto the urinary system. Now, the urinary system is going to contain the 1K and 3U's. I consider the one primary organ being the kidney, and then the 3U's, the tubes that are going to lead, and the holding tank, and then the other tube that leads out of the body. The first of them is going to be, again, the kidneys. Their job is a filtering unit. It's going to be located one on either side of the vertebral column. From there, it's going to empty down, or particular, what is going to empty down is urine from the ureters, from the kidney down into the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder is going to hold that urine and eventually will then excrete it out through the urethra. Here's a quick illustration of the urinary system. This is another diagram that you should star on your notes. Okay, make sure you star that. It's moving away from that of the kidney. The kidneys are located right there. And then the ureters is the tube that leads down. Urinary bladder is this larger structure. And then on the very bottom there is the urethra, which the urine will then leave. If we look at the kidney, now this is the main organ that you're going to be responsible for on this test. It is reddish brown in color. It is the bean shape, so those that eat your chili, it does look like a kidney bean. On either side of the vertebral column, it's going to be around the 12th thoracic and 3rd lumbar. However, the left kidney is up slightly higher than the right. If you think about it, one of the organs that is on the right-hand side, the largest internal organ, actually pushes that down. And that largest internal organ as you're probably thinking, is the liver. Kind of pushes that down a little bit. If you go back to here, you can actually see one of the things that is above the kidney itself, that organ that's right up on top, or I should say gland, that's the adrenal gland. And that gland is the one that's going to secrete adrenaline. Okay? Looking at the main job of the kidney is to help maintain homeostasis. Now, ways that it's going to do that is to help filter out and remove waste from the blood. It's going to get all of that wasted metabolic material out of there. One of the common ones we talked about earlier in the muscular system is removal of lactic acid. So it helps with that. It regulates volume as well as other compositions of the blood in terms of blood cells. And so in that sense, these two things are also vital. Besides filtering the blood to get your body and your blood to be a nice consistency with no toxins, it does two other things. One of them, it secretes the hormone erythropoietin. Erythro is, remember, red, and poietin is the building. It functions in their formation of red blood cells, so it helps to create red blood cells. It stimulates the red bone marrow and the ends of the epiphysis to start production. And then the last one, the secretion of renin, is the hormone that is going to be released when blood pressure has decreased, so it helps to kick start that back up again. And you'll see why in just a second. Okay? Now, kind of a neat fact here is that approximately 15 to 30, based on if you have one or two kidneys, of every cardiac output, so every time our heart goes through ventricular systole, 15 or 30%, both on one or two kidneys, will go directly there to the renal arteries. Remember, renal arteries is the one that's going to go to the kidneys. Even though it makes only less than 1% of our entire body mass, it has a whole bunch of blood going there. Reason being, it is vital. We have to make sure we remove toxins. And so we need to have our kidneys. We can live with just one. However, when we have two, it's much easier to remove those toxins. Okay? If problems are to arise, and you've probably heard of somebody who's had been a kidney transplant, they may end up having to go hemodialysis, which is going to usually last 3 times a week for several hours at a time. What they do is they sit in a chair, and think of it like if those you've donated blood, you have 2 IVs, one in one arm, one in the other, and instead of your blood going through your body and filtering into your kidney and then back out again, you take the blood out one arm, filter through a machine, and it comes back in the other arm. So it's just artificially filtering your blood versus your body doing it naturally. Now, we already mentioned the location of it. Here's just a couple illustrations of it. This is the next diagram that I'd make sure you star, highlight it, do whatever you need to. It is going to be on your test. That's this guy right here. That is location, the structure of the kidney. Now, a few things when looking at that kidney structure is that we have on there a few illustrations that you want to know. The renal cortex. Renal cortex is the outer layer. So if I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit, you can kind of see this outer layer there. This bracket. It's just the outer shaded in region all the way around that of the kidney. Okay, so just all the way around is the renal cortex. The renal medulla is this next bracket, which includes the next layer before it gets to this yellowish structure in the middle. So that's the renal medulla. The renal capsule is the outer covering of it. So I've got the three things so far: renal cortex, renal medulla, and then we have the capsule, which surrounds the whole structure. And then you end up getting into these renal pelvises, and the renal pelvis is the structure right in here that is going to contain the major and minor calyces. Think of those as kind of like the drainage pools inside these renal cortex and renal medulla. Inside this region here, you are going to do the filtering. And so all the urine that's going to be filtered within there is going to drain down into the major and minor calyces. Okay? All right. Move on to the next slide. Will help you take a look at, again, the structure that we're going to see here, which is, this guy right here on the right-hand side. That is the filtering unit, and that's what we're going to see here next. That filtering unit is called a nephron. Now, approximately 1 million nephrons per kidney. Those guys are the most important unit in this test, because those are the things that we're going to talk about as maintaining the homeostatic mechanisms. These nephrons are going to suck out all of those toxins within the kidneys. So when the blood goes through them, it's going through the nephron, and the materials are going to be removed from it. Okay? Now, what is the nephron made up of? It's made up of a corpuscle, and it's going to be made up of tubes. And you'll see that here in just a second. And there's two main types of those. There is a cortical nephron, which is going to be in the renal cortex, that outermost layer I shaded in yellow. And then the medullary, the juxtamedullary, which is going to be located in the renal medulla. Now, 80% of them are the cortical ones on the outside. So again, if I look at my images, 80% are going to be on the outermost side here, and then the remainder 20% are going to be in the juxtamedullary in there. Okay. Now, what does the nephron look like? Here is, let me get a better picture of the nephron. This is the last diagram on your test, this diagram here. This entire structure is your nephron. Okay. Now, I'm going to go back to the start of the nephron, which is this guy right here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. This is where we are going to have the artery. Now remember, this is going to be our renal artery. A for away, so the blood is actually coming in there. Look at the diameter of that one. Now, blood is going to be pumped into this region. This is the glomerulus. This is the capillary stuff inside this corpuscle or capsule. Now, as the blood starts to pool into this area, you can think of it almost like a balloon. Inside here, it starts to expand. Think of it kind of like blowing up. Okay, as it blows up, as it starts to get bigger and bigger, I increase pressure. Now, blood is then going to leave. And I think of efferent arterial, still going away from the heart. Efferent, E for exit. Go back up to A for arrival. Afferent versus efferent. But as I mentioned to you just a second ago, look at the diameter. Diameter of that one versus the diameter of that one. As it goes in faster, leaves slower, pressure starts to increase. As the pressure starts to increase, I can help regulate blood pressure. Going back to, as I mentioned before, the secretion of renin, how that's going to help stimulate blood pressure. So once it starts to decrease, the kidneys are consensate, and at that point we'll stimulate renin to kickstart and push more blood through it to allow for the toxins to be removed safely. Okay? Now, let's zoom out again a little bit and look at this structure here. this is where the afferent and efferent arteriole are taking place. I think of this almost like a little vacuum cleaner. When I suck up the toxins through the blood, the toxins are going to travel through these tubes, these coiled up tubes. The blood stays in. The blood cells stay in the blood, but the toxins and the water are going to be sucked up through that coiled up tube. Okay? Let's move on to the next slide and you can see a little bit easier. So here, that glomerulus is that corpuscle where it had the afferent going into the glomerulus, and then I leave out the exit. And as you saw, the A has a larger diameter than the E, and the glomerulus, the pressure starts to build up within there. Okay. In the tubes are just going to be interconnected tubes that are going to help with the reabsorption of some of the water and get put back and eventually get all the urine put back into the, empty all the urine down into the ureter. Okay. So now going back to this slide, if you take a quick peek at it, you can see that we have our glomerulus, which is again this capsule here. That capsule is the glomerulus. As the toxins come in, or I should say the blood starts to come in through, blood gets in there, and the toxins will now start to move its way into this tube. Now the toxins are going to be with water, so by simple diffusion they start to move through. Now the reason the tube is so long is just like the small intestine. Why is that so long? Longer it's in there, the better chance of getting all the toxins. Along with that, if water's being released and absorbed in there, 30% of all of that cardiac output blood goes through there. I better make sure that I am reabsorbing water. Okay? Now, we've already mentioned this. You can see the structure of the A coming in, the E exit, build up a pressure. Toxins will travel down there with the help of water. Now, if I'm looking at the pathway of the toxins throughout the system, I enter into the glomerulus, and then I go to the first tube. Remember, proximal is referring to the closest, and distal is referring to the end, and that's going to be down here. So I go from, looking at my structure, I go from the glomerulus to the proximal tube, to the descending loop, ascending loop, distal tube, and then the collecting duct. And that's what's shown in our step-by-step pathway. Proximal, descending, then ascending, and then distal tube, and then finally in the collecting duct. Okay, here's our last, just one more chance of showing those toxins. Again, going through in that area, in the proximal tube, going down the descending, back up the ascending, in the distal tube, and finally out the collecting duct. And then from there, it's going to empty down into the urinary bladder through the ureters. Now, in terms of urine, 95% of all of our urine is made up of water. Other things it contains are things like lactic acid, waste, other waste products, electrolytes, salts. So those things we were going to try to get rid of. Now, this is a huge stat for me. Our kidneys filter approximately 180 liters of fluids per day. Per day, 92-liter bottles of pop. That is a lot of liquid that's going through here. So we talked about why do I need these to be so long? To reabsorb the water. We cannot survive if we do have all the water or the blood that's filtering through. If that water does not get reabsorbed, we are not going to survive. So we must have reabsorption because at maximum you pee out maybe 2 liters a day. Okay? Alright, so here's just a chart. What you pee out versus what's filtered. Pretty amazing. So what does it do? Does it help maintain homeostasis? Absolutely. Okay. What we get in our urine is urea, which is made from the catabolism, which is the breakdown of amino acids, okay, or proteins in the liver. So urea is from the breakdown of amino acids and proteins in the liver. I think we're going to stop there. That's dealing with the physiology of the nephron, and then PowerPoint or slide 2, you will move on to the 3 U's, which will be the ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra.